Hey there, and welcome to another Brexit Explained video. In this video, we're going to talk about the around £39 billion that the UK is said to owe the EU. Or do they owe the EU that money? Well, that's kind of the point of this video. We've talked a lot about Brexit plans recently, with both Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson sharing their plans in the last couple of weeks. Both candidates have put forward policy positions where the UK would withhold parts of, or the entirety of, that £39 billion divorce payment. So we thought it right to question the legality of such a position. Before we do that though, I wanted to let you know that we have a bunch of new merch on our merch store, including our new Pride collection where all the proceeds go to charity, and our new TLDR news designs. Wonder why we always bug you with these announcements at the start of every video? Well, for 3 of our recent videos, we earn more from the merch shoutouts in the video than from YouTube ad revenue. YouTube can be an unreliable beast. And with your support, we can grow beyond just YouTube. Check out all of the designs over at our merch store. There's a link in the description. Formerly the financial settlement, the divorce payment isn't actually a singular payment, but rather a commitment to fulfilling ongoing obligations under EU law, an amount in the region of 40 to 45 billion euros. The most recent estimate from the Office of National Statistics places the value of the payment at 42.2 billion euros or 38.7 billion pounds. What does this massive financial settlement actually consist of though? Is it, as some Brexiteers suggest, a king's ransom for daring to leave the club and therefore illegitimate? Well, not quite. The EU has a budget similar to the Chancellor's yearly budget. The EU's budget is governed by the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, or MFF. The MFF is a 7-year-long framework that regulates the EU's annual budget. The EU budget comprises of 4 areas. Firstly, member state contributions. These contributions are fixed percentages of a member state's gross national income, or GNI. The size of a country's contributions rise or fall depending on fluctuations in their GNI each year. Secondly, the EU's own resources. These are collected on behalf of the EU by member states, as the EU has no tax-raising competencies. These own resources are mainly customs duties from third-party imports and agriculture levies. Thirdly, VAT. Member states contribute a proportion of their VAT revenue as part of the harmonised VAT base. Finally, the balance comes from taxes on EU staff salaries, contributions to EU programmes from third countries like Norway and Switzerland, and fines imposed by the Commission on companies breaching EU competition law. In March 2018, the OBR published details of what the £39 billion financial settlement actually included. 16.4 billion accounted for the UK's ongoing contributions to the EU budget up until 2020. From 2021 to 2028, the UK will contribute £18.2 billion towards projects that the UK agreed to but hasn't yet paid for. From 2029 onwards, the UK will contribute £2.5 billion towards the pensions of EU British officials and MEPs. If the withdrawal agreement had passed when it went to the House of Commons, this whole question of whether or not the UK should pay the EU this money wouldn't even be happening. If the withdrawal agreement had passed, the UK would basically be obligated to pay the EU this money. That's because the withdrawal agreement states, unless otherwise provided for in this agreement, the UK shall be liable to the Union for the United Kingdom's share of budgetary commitments of the Union budget and the budgets of the Union's decentralised agencies on the 31st of December 2020. And for the United Kingdom's share of commitments made in 2021 on the carryover of commitment appropriations from the budget of 2020. So essentially, if the withdrawal agreement had passed, the UK will be pretty locked into paying this money. However, as regular viewers of this channel will know, the withdrawal agreement wasn't passed. Because of this, the issue is still very much in the air. In fact, as I mentioned, both candidates are discussing the possibility of not actually paying the EU this money. Instead, they're discussing diverting this £39 billion Brexit dividend to fund other policy commitments, from investment in the NHS to education to cuts in taxation. But people have begun to discuss the legality of such a move. At the beginning of negotiations, the UK and EU determined some basic principles for the quality and timescale of this payment. They agreed that no member state should pay more or receive less because of the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the Union. The United Kingdom should pay its share of commitments taken during its membership, and the United Kingdom should pay neither more nor earlier than if it had remained a member state. While disregarding these principles would be in poor taste, it's not necessarily illegal. However, there are other areas where this whole thing becomes a lot more legally dicey. Many people who advocate for the UK not paying the divorce payment cite a House of Lords paper from 2017, which states that if an agreement is not reached, all EU law, including provisions concerning ongoing financial contributions and machinery for adjudication, will cease to apply, and the UK will be subject to no enforceable obligation to make any financial contribution at all. Essentially, this House of Lords report says that once the UK is out of the EU law no longer applies, and therefore the UK isn't obligated to follow EU law and doesn't have to fulfil its financial commitments under EU law. However, this report has been widely criticised, with newer analysis coming out in direct contradiction to the report. For example, Whitehall sources confirmed to The Telegraph that Attorney General Geoffrey Cox had warned that linking the payment of the divorce bill to progress made in any future trade negotiations would be illegal. Essentially, according to Cox, it's illegal for the UK to say they'll only pay if they get the deal they want. Philip Hammond says something similar when talking to the Treasury Select Committee, saying that to the extent that we're in the settlement we have provisionally agreed, we are making good on the commitments we've entered into with the UK's acquiescence during our period of membership of the European Union. These are obligations that we entered into, and they are obligations which will be due in any case. Very simply, according to these people, the UK should and must pay what it's committed to pay. This view is again corroborated by the European Union Committee of the House of Lords, which stated in a report that individual member states might seek to bring a case against the UK for the payment of outstanding liabilities under principles of public international law. But, as our witness explained, international law is slow to litigate and hard to enforce. This really backs up the viewpoint that if the UK is committed to pay something as part of the EU's budget, they might be obligated to actually pay. Though Brexit isn't something that happens every day, so no one can be sure if member states would even try and raise this difficult to fight case against the UK. The same report actually addresses this exact issue, going on to say, it's questionable whether an international court or tribunal could have jurisdiction. Article 344 of the TFEU prohibits EU member states from submitting the legal interpretation of the EU treaties to a court other than the CJEU. Therefore, even if any EU state did want to take the UK to court over their obligations, it's not clear where they'd be able to take this issue up, and who'd have the jurisdiction to rule on the matter once the UK is no longer beholden to the EU's courts. At the same time, sources close to Emmanuel Macron, the French president, have said that failure to pay the divorce settlement will be akin to sovereign debt default. Sovereign debt default is a serious issue. If this were to happen, the macroeconomic stability of the UK would be further brought into question. Even putting to one side the impact of a no-deal Brexit, if the UK were classed as defaulting, its credit rating would have to be revised. Government bonds would quickly lose value, and the effective interest rate would sharply increase. However, President Macron's attitude was rebuked by S&P, Fitch and Moody's, three of the top credit rating agencies. They explained that the UK not paying its financial settlement would not constitute sovereign debt default. If this section goes a bit over your head, don't worry, we've only really added it for the real policy wonks. S&P's primary analyst for the UK, Arti Sahuja, explained that their ratings only take into account commercial debt obligations. A spokesman for Fitch explained that sovereign ratings refer only to risk borne by the private sector and private investors, not official entities. Again, none of us here at TLDR News are legally qualified, but what's clear is that the legality is highly nuanced and ultimately would be dependent on what would undoubtedly be a costly and highly fraught legal battle. A big "we don't know" might seem like a bit of a cop-out at the end of this video, but it's a significant "we don't know." Lawyers, legal scholars and politicians don't know the implications of the UK deciding to withhold this money. It looks possible that the UK could get away with not paying the EU this money. But beyond the legal importance of this issue, it's not possible to know what the impact would be on the UK's relationship and diplomacy with EU nations post-Brexit. Like with most things related to Brexit, there's a hell of a lot of uncertainty here. And maybe the biggest question is if the UK is willing to roll the dice and risk withholding this £39 billion. Only time will tell. At the beginning of this video, we gave you a quick glimpse into the business of TLDR news and how alternative funding sources help our business. We know this kind of thing, the business of news, startups and YouTube, is really interesting to some people. And that's why we share some of this information with our patrons. Patrons who donate $5 and up get access to behind the scenes posts where we share our thoughts and tell them what's coming up next. Those who donate $10 and up will get access to our podcast, Breaking News, where we discuss what we're doing to break the formula of news. In our first episode, we discuss how TLDR makes money and more about our new channel, TLDR US. To hear the full podcast, make sure to sign up to our Patreon now. You can get access to the podcast, the posts, and many more perks. Find out more about that over at patreon.com/TLDR news. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you're updated when we make more videos. Also, be sure to hit the bell icon to make sure you get a notification every time we post. You can also follow us across other social networks simply by searching for TLDR News.